Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is Springfield, Oregon Mayor Sean VanGordon. Sean, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. This is the first time I've been live and in person.
Yeah, it's always funny when people meet me in person for the first time because they realize I'm super short. I'm 5'9". I'm actually average. All the haters out there can have their opinions and leave them to themselves. You know, I really appreciate you doing this. It's been an honor since I started this podcast to build friendships with people that I never imagined I would. I didn't know anything about anything, Springfield politics at all. You know, we bought our home. I'm from here, but I had moved to Eugene. I moved back in 2018, bought a house, and I'm super grateful that I did. And then I started this podcast, and I basically started learning about local government. And I realized real quick how much more digestible Springfield is than Eugene as far as politics, because it's a lot easy. There's a different set of issues, a different set of tasks to tackle. But you've been gracious enough. You were on city council when I first met you, and then became the mayor, and you were gracious enough to be a guest. I think this is the third time, maybe fourth.
It might be the fourth. I've
Yeah.
been on for
3.5, because you came on with the fire chief.
Yep.
And then, but you've also I've been vocal about this on the podcast. You've also been really awesome behind the scenes by sending me recommendations. Alan Benavides from the Eugene Emeralds, Police Chief Shearer was a great guest that you recommended, and you kind of helped me set that up. And so I super appreciate that. I mean, it's just, I've been so fortunate with the guests that I've had over the last 4 years that I pinch myself all the time. And I'm really proud of where we're at today after 177 episodes. This is number 178, which is pretty wild. So, but thanks again for doing this.
Not a problem. And also, I listen every time it comes out.
Yeah, it's cool. And my goal is that there's so many. I wanted to do stories of the underrepresented, but there's so many things that I like to spotlight that I know that other corners of that I spotlight may not be familiar with. So an unintended consequence is that I see a growing community that has met through listening to my podcast, or they become aware of each other and reach out. Social media allows us all to communicate and stuff. It's really cool, so.
The world's a lot smaller than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into it. We got a lot to talk about today. You're seeking re-election. So you've been in office now since, was it 21?
Yeah. So I became mayor in January 21. So that was an appointment. And then because of the way the charter works, I have to run for election, at the next regularly scheduled election, which is this election coming up.
Right. And so if you are elected, how many terms can you have? 2 full terms now?
No, there's no term.
There's no term limit on mayor.
There's no term limits. It's going to be a little bit strange for folks, because if I get elected in November, I get elected for 2 years and then it's back on the regularly 4-year scheduled term. So
sure.
This election's to fill out the rest of Mayor Lundberg's term that she was elected to in 2020.
Side note, but with Kate Brown, for Republicans, they think she's been president for 11 years. There's an 8-year max, right?
Oh, I would have to
look it up.
There's a 2-term max, but she became governor by appointment. And
right.
So somehow I think that.
Did she get an extra couple?
No, I think that may end up being she may have been governor for 10 years, not 8.
Okay.
So,
okay. And that's why a lot of people, it feels like she's been in office for a long time, but we won't get sidetracked with that. So now you are running again. You're running, for this office for basically your 1.5 term. You're running unopposed. So yes. How do you like your chances?
I hope they're pretty good.
Yeah.
I've been unopposed on other council elections, and it's really important that even when you run unopposed, it's still people's vote, right?
Yeah.
It's still a sort of, signification of support. I still want to go out and ask for people's support and still talk about where I think this community is going to be in the next 2 years, and just not assume that I'm the only entry on the ballot, and therefore I don't need to talk to my boss about it.
100%, exactly, 100%. I saw Steve Moe was doing something similar, where he was doing debates and forums and things, because city councilor Steve Moe, if you're unaware, listening, but he was talking about, well, I still have to learn. I have to bump elbows with the community, and campaigns give you that opportunity. Then you can hear what people are wanting to see changed. And so that's really cool. And so, I mean, we had scheduled this episode, full disclosure, we had scheduled this episode like 3 months ago. You're like, well, I'm running on, for a re-election. Can I get a spot in the beginning of October? And I basically was like, you could come on every week if you'd like, but so we had talked, just, you mentioned, in the last 10 years, Springfield has received a lot of high praise. And I've talked to ad nauseum on the podcast about the previous administration with Christine Lundberg, and I'm very vocal about my political views. And she's more, I guess you could say, conservative leaning, but I think it's, pretty fair to say nonpartisan, because that's what the seat is. But I still think that what she had done and her leadership, or at least on her watch, was really effective and really good in Springfield in a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways I would have criticism too, with just as a whole, but there's a lot of moving parts of how, it's like everyone wants to say the executive branch of government is like the one to blame for everything. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair, and it's not fair. But over the past 10 years, Springfield's received high praise for the direction it's heading. What do you think is the major factor?
It's the people in Springfield, right? Like, Springfield has got a long history of getting things done and figuring out how to work together, left, right, center, and just sort of come together to make sure that the community is what we want it to be. That's really where our legacy is our ability to get things done.
Yeah, for sure. Now, mayor being a nonpartisan seat, like I had just mentioned, and I think you are the epitome of nonpartisan. You work really well with both sides, and you've received praise locally from both Democrats and Republicans. How do you manage to keep both sides happy in such a divided time? I don't know if it's about keeping them happy, but
yeah, like I don't know that keeping them happy is the right answer, right?
Sure.
But I think the answer is to show up for people. There's parts, and be curious about how people go through their lives, what's going on with their business and their family and their schools. And not really jump to a judgment, really let the conversation play out in front of me. And the best thing I've had that's worked out for me is I talk to a lot of people. I go to a lot of events, and I just enjoy Springfield for being Springfield. And that gives me an opportunity to learn, ask questions, interact with folks. If it is, people are always surprised when they leave a message, I call them back.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah,
and it's that kind of thing that really, I think, speaks to the nature of what this community is, but it also allows us to go, okay, potholes aren't partisan. The fire department's not partisan.
Right. Totally. Absolutely. And local government, I can see why those positions are nonpartisan, because you can't, you got to work together. And in Springfield, do you know the exact, or somewhat of a rough estimate on the demographics, if it's like registered Republicans versus Democrats?
I don't know anymore. Yeah. I think if non-affiliated, it's not the biggest party in Springfield. It's the second biggest party.
And right? People will register where that doesn't mean that that's where they fall. It comes down to primaries. I know that there's been some times where I've considered registering Republicans so that I could vote, kind of against the candidate in a sense. Maybe not locally as much as nationally, but I'm looking at you, DT. No, but let's talk a little bit about the local election before we get into some of the major issues Springfield's facing. But for locally, when I say local, I mean Eugene, Springfield, but also statewide. What is one race that you're keeping your eye on locally?
Oh, I'm actually going to tell you there's two races I'm watching locally. One of them is that West County County Commission race, because I think that's the only county commission race that is really active and still ongoing into the fall. But how that county commission race goes is going to sort of dictate, kind of the direction that the board's going to go the next couple of years.
Yeah, can you talk? So Don Leslie and Ryan Seneca.
Yeah, and I don't know that much about either one of them. I would, if I was handicapping it right now, I think Ryan's got kind of the inside track here when I just sort of look at how close I think he is to what I would think the center of that district is.
Yeah, I think that only my thoughts on it, and again, I cover a lot of Springfield and I don't know a ton about it. We will be talking to Randy Groves in a couple weeks, and we're going to cover, he's a Eugene City Councilor, former police or fire chief. And so we're going to get deep dive into some Eugene stuff. So maybe I'll be able to talk to him about that more. And we're going to talk about the recall as well. But I do think that Seneca's kind of tapped into just anger and vitriol for things that are made up. So like the election being stolen and things like that. So I think that you can rile up a base. And so I think that sometimes you hear more voice. And then when the turnout happens, it's surprising. But West Eugene's demographic may be different. I've met Dawn Leslie, and I think she's an incredible person. I think, I don't know anything about Ryan Seneca other than I do have, because in the barber world, I have some just connections across the board. And I had a longtime customer of my boss, actually, that told me he was working on his campaign. And him and I had a really respectful conversation, even though we are 100% polar opposites of each other. So, but my take on it is that I saw this tone of anger for things that I think were manufactured and not actually in reality. So
I definitely ask Counselor.
We'll talk about it.
And he knows a lot. He knows a lot more about it.
Me and you are not the two people that are going to know a ton about West Eugene. Our heads are so deep into Springfield. That's the facts. I didn't intend that, but when I started this podcast, I decided, because this is my hometown, is Springfield, Oregon. So I've lived in Springfield, Oregon. I moved here when I was 11, so I've lived here longer than most of the people in office. Now, okay. So another one you had mentioned, did you mention both? You said the West Eugene.
Yeah. So the second race, obviously, I'm watching is Congressional District 4. That's the Val Hoyle, Alex Carletos. And, I have a unique experience because I get to meet everybody that's out there. And I'll just tell you, a quick story about Val. So at the start of the race, it's very common for people to call and ask me what's the most important thing to you, right? What are issues that are going on in Springfield? And I brought up a pretty technical issue, which is this 42nd Street levy. You've probably heard me talk about it a couple of times about the importance of making sure we have good flood control for the northern part of the city, because that keeps us all from having to buy flood insurance, right?
Right.
And that's not a great topic to actually run a campaign on, right? I did not give her any fodder, but she took the material that I had. She's called me about 6 different times about it, learned as much about it, more about it than I did, and has made calls on Washington, to Washington to help, just put in a good word for the work that, what we needed as a city, right? And that's during that campaign.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I think about how, I like them both, but I think that spoke to me a lot. Right?
She's currently labor secretary. So she's working. What is Alex Carletos' position?
Oh, I don't know what he does.
Reality television?
No, I don't know what he does professionally. He's from Douglas County. He's from, my home county, but I don't know what he does for his
It's been interesting to watch all of these ad campaigns, the political ads. It's nauseating. Everyone agrees that they're nauseating. But I think that there's important information, at least to set yourself apart from the other options and whatnot. But it's so funny to me how, and I don't want to nitpick just the conservatives. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be a hypocrite, but with Alex Carletos' commercial, it says he was praised by Obama. And it's not for political stuff, but for the train thing. But the reality is that it's just funny how they do it. I don't know a lot about Alex Carletos. I know that he, his whole campaign is that he, saved the people on the train.
Well, and here's, here's the thing about, Alec, I like him a lot. I think he's, he grew up in Douglas County. So obviously the county that I'm from, and the amount of moral courage that it takes to act through that event is absolutely outstanding. And we should always be grateful for that. And he's, he comes from Douglas County. He's a timber guy by nature and wants to advocate for the rural counties. And I think that's admirable.
And that is Oregon. And and then sometimes it's difficult things. And I think that sometimes in the Valley, it's short-sighted where people are like, well, we need to stop cutting down the trees. And it's that's actually not good for forest fire, and different things like that. And that's a different conversation, but it's just a really complex deal. It's not as easy as people want it to be, And so, I think that's fair. I will say for Val Hoyle, my buddy, a good friend of mine who I've met through the podcast, really, Anthony Reed, he's in the commercials, and those are legit. He 100% believes and he has every reason to believe what he's talking about in the commercials, because he's talked about it on my show too, where he's a union carpenter, and he knows that she goes to bat for workers' rights, and that he just knows that she actually, like you were saying, deep dives, tries to learn about the issue so that she can. So I personally think she's the more qualified candidate, but well, now I want to move on to the governor's race, and this is insane. I mean, it's really rare that we actually have 3 candidates, and I think that this is something that's really good for. I personally have been talking about this a lot, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, because coming from a nonpartisan take, I've had people that were probably more left leaning that were saying that Betsy Johnson is not tough enough on climate. I've had people that are more right leaning saying that they're really liking. My dad is like, he's going to vote for her. He's already made up his mind, and he's pretty conservative. I also think that people that you hear that say, oh, she's just a rhino, or oh, she's just a Republican. Well, then those people are actually not wanting to come together at all. So that's just exposing them more than anything else. That being said, this election is going to be decided, in my opinion, especially in Oregon, but also nationally, on where your stance on a women's right to choose. Like, even my dad said something that was really telling. He said, well, she supports Planned Parenthood, and he doesn't, because he doesn't know what they do. But I said, well, Dad, I don't think you can win an election right now if you don't, because of the fact that, or at least if you want to abolish Planned Parenthood, you're going to lose. Like, it's just the way it goes.
This is a complex one, and probably the most, like, I live and breathe politics. We always say the next election is the most important election in our lifetime. Oregon politics is a contradiction wrapped up in an enigma sometimes, right? And I think Betsy Johnson embodies that. So when I think about it, I'm a Betsy fan. There's a sign that's coming from my front yard here shortly, and hopefully it's going to get put up. And what I tell people is, I experience people and meet a lot of folks. So I'll tell you the story about Betsy Johnson, and then I can just kind of describe where I see the rest of the race. Recently, I went to the first mayor's conference that I've ever been into, because I haven't been mayor that long. And there's a Friday night reception. You always go to conferences. People have a fundraiser and, baskets to fund scholarship funds, that kind of thing. And I walk in the room, and without campaign aids, Betsy Johnson's sitting there, right? Like, on a Friday night in Newport with a bunch of mayors. And here's the 2 things that struck me about that. One of them is apparently everybody was invited, but it's not the first time that she's been out there. And it wasn't as a campaign, sort of event. She just came down and was mingling with everybody, in the cheese and wine line with everybody else.
Where was this at? Sorry.
This was at the Oregon Mayor's Conference. Okay. It was in Newport this year. And when talking and meeting other mayors, it's like, oh no, she was down there. She goes every year. She's always gone every year. And to see that sort of level of sort of willing to outreach to folks, talk to people, get connected with local leaders, like that's appealing to me.
Sure. Yeah. And especially in your position,
Yeah.
And it's hard to gauge, because I was at the Black celebration, the Black Business Celebration at the Alton Baker Park, and I met Tina Kotek. I really didn't talk to her personally, but I was sitting around, and she's rad. Tina Kotek's cool in a lot of ways. I thought she was really cool, really personable. So, I mean, but maybe that's campaigning, but that being said, like, there's the Black cultural celebration. That's what it was.
Yeah, right.
But everybody's bumping elbows all over the place during a campaign. And I think it's really cool to get out and meet these people, because, like yourself, they're so approachable. A lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And here's my concern with Speaker Kotek. I don't know that she's running a race for, all of Oregon, right? Sure. Like, it's, and again, she's got kind of the inside track, and, has to sort of like where her base is, and people need to run the campaign that they want to. But when I read her material, right, they stop in Eugene, they don't come to Springfield, right?
Really?
Yeah. They when there's stuff where I read material that comes out and I go, look, if I grew up in Douglas County, this wouldn't speak to me at all.
Yeah.
And and I have a hard, and this is the sort of the circle I'm trying to close in my hair. They're the intellectual thinking behind the last 10 years of, Oregon politics. And something like 70% of Oregonians believe we're going the wrong way. And so that causes me to really listen for, okay, what are we going to do different?
Yeah. Right? And I've been saying, I agree with that, but there's a caveat. I've been saying though too that we need to lower the temperature. So sometimes I've actually been like, at least kind of like, what's this? I haven't made up my decision. I'm still leaning towards Tina Kotek, I'll be honest. But that being said, like that I do think that we need to lower the temperature, and I think that Betsy Johnson might actually have the best. She might be the one that can do that the best in some ways. You're going to hear people on the extremes angry and all that stuff, but we had talked about before that there's a huge group in the middle that is fed up with both extremes. Now, as far as the homelessness is, in my opinion, the number one issue in Oregon, and let alone Eugene and Portland, it's beyond the pale. But people can make the arguments that the last 10 years, that this would be a continuation of that administration. She's been working on it. What has it fixed? I think it's a little short-sighted, because I think that we need to start looking at basically the fall of capitalism. But we need to look at Walmart and Amazon and these massive corporations that have eliminated small businesses. So maybe, I'm not saying Democrats have a hit track record of being super pro-business, but we need to find ways to help small businesses so that people can have a livelihood, so that they don't have to mask their depression and their pain with drugs. There's so many causes that gets you to drug use, and drug use isn't the only reason for homelessness. It's a lack of opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so I do think somebody that has experience with it, it's not necessarily fair to say that it's a complete, well, you've already been working on it, you haven't done anything. Now, I think that's an absolute knock on Christine Drazan, because her whole strategy, and sometimes the conservative strategy, is hard edge. We need more policing. And that's not, we'll get to the public safety and policing in a bit, but that's not, to me, the answer. I mean, it's just there's a balance. There's a balance.
So I wish I knew Christine a little bit better to comment for you about it. And I just don't. But like I guess the thinking that I come back to is the willingness to do and think about and do something different if what we're doing is not working. Right. And I think that's where I'm kind of going, okay, I'm listening for that sort of thread in the Kotek campaign materials. And I don't hear it. And I'll give you one example. And this is an argument I have at the state with the state right now. Is the state legislature, right, like in the regulatory environment in Oregon, is regulating at a molecular detail. I made a post in Facebook about this a little while ago. One of the unfunded mandates that we have on our desk right now is about $9 million to implement, and there's no dollars to do it. Right. Like, so there's something broken. Like,
sure.
And I understand that everybody's trying to do the right thing, and it's a much longer conversation. And I would love to spend another hour and a half chatting with you about, changing capital trends and bonds and everything that we need to do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, if you want to look at Tina Kotek she's Secretary of State, I mean, voting rights, what's your take on mail-in voting? Are you a fan?
Yeah, and Tina Kotek's not the Secretary of State. Well, she was the Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House. Sorry. Okay.
For the last, I've never voted in a voting booth. Like, mail-in voting came in 98, which ironically was my first election. Like, we should just let people vote.
I was wrong. Speaker of the House. Yeah. The reason that my mind goes there is because that is another major thing on this year's election is there's people that want to take away voting rights, and again, manufacture this lie that there's a lot of mail-in votes that people are ballot harvesting, and it's just not true. There's not evidence to support it anywhere. It's not a fact that it's caused issues, and there's a lot of people pushing for that because they want lower turnout because they don't have the numbers.
Where my head is we're all citizens in a democracy. Let everybody vote, count the votes. Whoever gets the most votes wins.
I support people that pay taxes voting, even if you're here on a green card, because you have representation without. I personally, we may disagree on that, but I think I work on campus.
Yeah.
And I talk to people all the time that are here for long stays,
right?
That are here for 5 to 10 to 12 years on green cards. I think that they should have taxation with representation. I think that they should be able to speak a little bit. I don't know how that would work. Almost like a, that we could be here for days,
Yeah.
but I truly think that there's something there. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me, but it's like, why not? Why not? Why do they not have a voice?
I think the answer that you have is a longer discussion about how visas and green cards work, right? Like, and I've got opinions here.
Sure. I do want to have you back too. And we've got so many things we could discuss, but civics and just the way that it all works. We've talked behind the scenes about doing a deep dive to really explain it all, but we got to talk about some issues. So as far as the governor's race, you had kind of mentioned, so are you endorsing Betsy Johnson? Did you say you were getting your yard sign?
I am getting a yard sign.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Apparently we're making breaking news here on.
Sure, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. But, and then, I mean, I will say that, like, hey, there's a lot of people in my crew, in my party that are going to be upset, but I'm not a decided voter at this point. I have to be proven to a little bit more. And I think that should tell people stuff, not just about me, but about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party needs to be looking at every politician should always be evolving. If you get set in your ways too much and you tell people that they should join you, that's not how things work. You have to listen to your people.
Yeah. And to be fair, right? Like, I have a responsibility to the citizens of Springfield, right? Even though I'm sharing what I'm doing in my personal life here, if either one of those if any campaign wants to come down, a tour, meet, I'm always open to, showing people around Springfield, talking about what's important to folks and sharing the information. Because the reality is any three of them could be governor.
Sure. And one of the things I didn't mention is the potential that Betsy Johnson is a spoiler, where she ends up taking the votes from Tina Kotek, and then Christine Drazen gets in. And I think that Christine Drazen is the least qualified of the three, in my opinion, for the position for where I want the direction of the state to go. So we'll see. I mean, it's gonna be really, really interesting. It's pretty rare that we have a race that's got this much attention, nationally. And I think that it actually is something that nationally people should pay attention to, because I think that these 3-party races, though they can have spoilers, we need to have 5 candidates in campaigns, in my opinion. But that many commercials people would throw up in their mouth, so that wouldn't be good. So let's move on. Let's talk about issues. We're going to talk about public safety and policing first. I've got a few areas I'd like to mention, but one of the things you had mentioned that you wanted to at least talk about that's on the ballot in Springfield is really, really important, is ballot measure 20-237, which is the jail and police levy. So tell me about that and tell me why you think it's super important.
Well, this is our levy that supports the jail and police services in Springfield. So it's about $1.40. It's a renewal, so it's the same price that people were paying the last time it was up 5 years ago. So what this does is it sort of protects the level of service that we have in policing today. So it doesn't just fund the jail. It also funds about 10 FTEs that are either patrol folks or people in the building that are evidence clerks and things like that, as well as some services around the courts, right? So $1.40 per $1,000 of home value. It's property taxes. Right.
Okay.
Correct. And it's an operating levy, so we have to do it we have to come out and ask every 5 years. But if you want to talk about that, if you love downtown Springfield, if you love all the the great things about feeling safe in Springfield, the public safety levy and the work that we've done around that has been critical. When you stand on the corner of Planktown, that was one of the highest crime rates corners in Springfield before the jail came around.
Yeah, this is tough, because this is, I think, why Springfield gets high marks is because I've had Eugene police officers, maybe off the record, I don't know, but tell me that Springfield was known for having a heavy hand. And so there's a lot of nuance to this. Okay. So I want this, and I'm glad that,
absolutely,
yeah, there's a lot of nuance, because I do think, like, I have mixed feelings about, for example, tents next to businesses, or things like that with homelessness, because obviously, this is just really difficult. So my concern is with this, when I first heard about it, is that there has been a pretty big amount, one is too many, but a pretty big amount of large settlements that have been paid out for situations of excessive force from the Springfield Police Department. I don't know the exact numbers, but I mean, in the Stacey Kenney case, it was like $4.5 million. And then I talked, when I mentioned with Michelle Emmons who's running for state representative in, like, I believe Southeast Lane County, that her opponent, Charles Conrad, there was a settlement in 2015 where he body slammed a handcuffed homeless deaf guy, that handcuffed man. So there was a $450,000 settlement. Now, my concern is does that money that goes to this levy, does it at all go to paying out those settlements?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, that's huge. That's huge for me, because that would be a deal breaker for me.
Yeah. So when there's tight rules financially about how levies work. So when we tell the public, and you've seen it with the street levy, the fire levy, that we're going to do X, right? That money is sort of earmarked, tagged, whatever you want to have to do X. So the thing that I think is valuable to see, right? And a lot of this goes back to how dangerous Lane County was in the late 90s and early aughts. And that's a whole other...
And Springfield specifically. Yeah.
Like, property crime has dropped,
sure,
50% since since the jail opened. But the reality is we're going through separate phases about how we think about public safety.
Yeah.
When Monday rolls around, we're going to be talking about what a drug and treatment court looks like.
Yeah, we need, because go ahead. And
well, and that's one of the things I keep talking to people about, why I believe this levy is still important, is because it protects the level of services that we have today. And then, the ask that the public keeps coming back is, they were interested in more cahoots services, more mental health services, more treatment services. And that allows us to really build on top of a solid foundation, so that if you have a property crime, or you have, God forbid something happens with your house, right? Like, that you have a reasonable response time so that PD can service whatever that issue is. And then we sort of can have some running room, if you will, to address some of these other issues related to the, to the public safety. And, people are usually shocked because they think of this as the jail levy. Well, it's really older than that. It's really, like, the thing came around in 2002, specifically because the community said, hey, city, you're not responding in a way
sure
to crime calls in the city, right? And we need a higher level of service. So even if you look at the story that we've been through the last couple of years and say, hey, maybe that's, I need you guys to do more. The argument I always make to people is, this is about getting the foundation of services right, to allow us to sort of transition to some of those reform maturity conversations that we have long term.
I mean, Police Chief Shearer, when he was on my podcast, it was, and we're moving on. And I said it then, from the previous, chief who retired, and I mean, I was pretty vocal, where I was like, it's pretty clear to me that it was kind of like, well, they basically decided, because they were probably going to be pushed out, but they did retire. And I was totally impressed with what I saw from Police Chief Shearer. We have not had a situation happen like the Stacey Kenny situation yet under Chief Shearer's watch. So we don't know exactly how he would respond. I do have faith that there would be accountability, right? And so, but it's extremely important to me that, we do want more policing, but we don't want that to mean that Springfield Police is known for having a heavy hand. We don't want the police to be running around and being intimidating to people, because that actually doesn't make a safer community. What it makes is that it makes more situations where people want to elude, because they're like, what if I get shot by this cop? They're running for their safety. And those laws are difficult, because in Washington State, there's a law that they've now, you can say it's activists, prosecutors, or however it is, that not you, but like people, right. But that they're saying, like, they've made it so where you cannot, if someone runs, you cannot chase them unless there's probable cause of certain kinds of crimes, right? And I don't know the answers to these. These are really complicated, but the thing is that there's a reason that people are running and fleeing. I mean, we had a guy in, I don't know if it was Eugene, Springfield. We had a guy that was pulling women over and sexually assaulting them. It was a police officer. So this was 20 years ago, but I'm just saying these issues, like, people like, you just need to do what they say. And it's like, no, like, yes, you should, but we need to know that you can trust that they're going to do something moral. I'm not accusing the Springfield police of this, but these are really, really important things. Now, this is separate than the levy. I think the levy right. and the jails, I think the proof is in the pudding in a lot of ways, that those cases are not why things have improved, because they're knocking billy clubs against people's necks. You know what I'm saying? That's not what's happening.
And
I don't believe
no,
that. I don't
and
believe
that's
that. I don't believe that.
and that's right, and that's not, that's not a 21st century sort of policing.
It's not. It's not. And so these cases, though rare, but they do need to be looked at. And obviously there's moments where it's such tense moments that bad moves happen because they're human beings that make these decisions, like potentially with Charles Conrad that's running for office. I mean, lost his temper. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know the whole story,
And I don't know. I do not know the whole story either. And even if I did know the whole story, individual cases are really not a place for me to be able to comment about. I can tell you that, policing continues to change and evolve, right? Like in that we're that as an industry, right? This thing is moving as quickly as, very, very quickly to sort of adapt, grow, add training, right? Like whatever case, term you want to use. But I think where we're going to end up is a place where you've got a group of folks, and we need to get them the equipment, the training, and talk clearly about how we want to be policed as a community. And I think that's a good conversation to have.
Yeah. We've got a couple comments that I'd like to read because it's specific to this topic.
Sure.
So Mark Molina, he said, I was on the original pack for the jail levy. I'm on the current pack. This levy is critical to funding ongoing safety needs in our community in many areas of operations, as the mayor stated. He also said, the foundations of the levy are sound. How the funds are utilized follows strict rules and cannot be misappropriated. So that is good. Yeah. And thank you for that, Mark. Shout out to Mark Molina. He's one of my good friends behind the scenes. He's a great man. A listener, Steve Shin, said, we must clean up the homeless problem. And I don't care if I care. And I don't know if I care if it's 21st century policing. And my instant thought on that is that even though I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm familiar with this guy, but like that being said, I have to say this. I share the frustrations. Totally. We may have differences of opinion on strategy. I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer. We are in this together,
We are in this together.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your comment.
You don't know who Steve is?
I don't know. I probably do.
He is the owner behind Bartolotti's.
Okay.
Downtown, and is an absolute great business owner. Yeah. And I enjoy talking to him every single time. My daughters, who love pizza because they're 6, refer to his place as the pizza store.
Okay. Well, I'm going to check it out. So Steve, thank you so much for your comment. And I'm with you. I think that I've been very vocal about it. It's not just a simple answer.
And that's the importance of the level of conversations that we've sort of talked about when, integrating cahoots, right? Integrating, and on the fire side, they've integrated different levels of service. They're sort of building out this, how do we actually respond, not just for today, but actually deal with the issue that, folks are facing.
Let me say this though, Like with policing, that is one part of the solution. Another part of the solution, when we decriminalize drugs, because we wanted to make sure that we're not, hear me out. When we, I was on the podcast against it. But that being said, the promise was that when we decriminalize drugs, that people would get treatment instead of incarceration.
Correct.
And so until we have centers to go to, which is going to cost money, people have to understand. So I've really, really done my due diligence, in my opinion, to understand where people are coming from when they say defund the police, right? They don't the extremes, that's not who's running government, especially in Springfield. But that being said, that's what they mean. We need to reallocate funds. We need to actually, unfortunately, probably raise taxes across the board in some ways, because we have to have places to go if we're going to fix this problem. You have to invest in your people, in your community.
So I separate the conversations in my head. Okay, so, and we can tackle them in 2 separate things, right? Because when I hear that, I hear like, hey, there's a big sort of healthcare gap that's out there, right? And so, hey, you have a bucket of resources here. You need to move it from one place to another. And so when you think about what you're asking from the police, that isn't a reallocation sort of problem. Like we've got to address, and continue to, have a pretty open and, honest conversation about where we want policing to go in the next couple of years. And I know we're going to get into that here in a little bit, but I think that's a kind of a separate conversation than the sort of that the Measure 110, conversation.
Sure.
I want to make sure that when you call 911, right, that there's a reasonable response time, and that takes time and energy and sort of money. And I want to make sure that when when you take policing about public safety, about people physically, personally, and their property, right, that we have a law enforcement force that does that to keep everybody safe, right? Because that's how you create a truly welcoming community, so that we don't have everybody breaking and entering, cars getting broken into, people getting hurt, right? That's the policing conversation. The sort of behavioral health drug conversation is a much broader and the thing I'll share with you.
I think that's a really good thing to say, and I think that's true. And go ahead.
Yeah. The thing I'll share with you about the Measure 110 conversation, like, the whole thing needs to be revisited. I know it's coming from a place that says, like, we got to get people off drugs. But, I had somebody sent me a text the other day where somebody had been taking drugs on the streets of Springfield. And basically they walk up to the guy and they say, hey, it's legal. And, like, leave me alone. It is really dangerous to our communities.
I agree.
To say drugs are legal in the state of Oregon and just come here and you can take meth or heroin or fentanyl until, like,
there was a student in South Umpqua School District, I believe. It doesn't matter. In Oregon, I saw it on the news that there was a student that OD'd in the bathroom, and a kid. And this is the problem, because it's so accessible. We're having an absolute, the fentanyl thing is killing kids with one pill. And these are like, you take one wrong hit, the next thing you'll be doing heroin, which is bullshit. But now we're actually dealing with the reality that this is how extreme it is. It's no joke, and I think that's the drug stuff is out there. We have to revisit that. I want to get back real quick. So there's two parts to what can cause homelessness and all that stuff. There's many, many, many parts that can cause homelessness, and policing, their part in it is just one thing that cops do. I'm kind of like trying to figure out how I want to segue this in. I just want to say, back to what we were talking about with policing, me and you, two white men, I think that Counselor Damian Pitts would have a different take on his experience as a black man. What we saw, and this was under the previous chief, what we saw in Thurston during the Black Lives Matter protests. I watched the stream. It was an obvious imbalance of the way that it was handled. And I understand that people, when you're going through neighborhoods, I'm not a big fan, and I've said this on the podcast many times, when you're going through neighborhoods causing to protest to make a point, because they were trying to get people's attentions. I'm not a big fan of that concept when you go to people's homes. And I think that sometimes when there's protest, the people that start the protest, they're going to get a lot of vitriol, no matter what their cause is, if they're being, near homes. But my take on it was the policing was absolutely imbalanced. I mean, there was, in front of police, there was, we'll just call them Proud Boys, that were literally punching kids, and they did nothing. And then there was police that were punching people, and they did nothing. And punching people that were peacefully protesting. And yes, they're on the streets, but that is within their constitutional rights. And they're angry because they want to know what's going to change, so that they have to know that they don't have to elude a cop if they get pulled over, because they may be shot as a black man or woman. And it's difficult. So there's an independent investigation going into the response for the Black Lives Matter protest. Where are we at with that? Is there any progress on that?
So the independent investigation's done. That's the thing that's referred to as the Brazil report. So one of the things that I'll tell you is, like, I can't, like, a lot of this is still wrapped up in litigation. So I can't get into a whole lot of the specifics, but I can tell you, I know that this is a big interest in the among a lot of people in the for the city of Springfield. In that same sort of time frame, we did get, I don't know, maybe three separate reports that covered a lot of recommendations. A lot of those recommendations, including the Brazil report, but it was the OIR report, the report out of the Kenny settlement. A lot of those recommendations have been complete. And when you hear, if you listen to the discussions at city council right now, there's a lot of what I would call entrepreneurship type work that is happening and coming out of the police department. Either we get feedback, sometimes it's not good, but we get feedback and people come back and say, hey, we heard this, we're doing this now. Or you hear a lot of work around, different folks that have sort of different ideas in the, as the profession of policing is changing, to go, okay, we need to start working towards this way. I know that over the long term, we want to get to a place where everybody's asking this question: what's Springfield up to from a policing a policing place? But it has got a long road to get there.
Yeah, because the reputation. Steve Shin left another comment that I think is really perfect for what we're talking about. It says, I specifically moved to Springfield from South Eugene because of the city's respect for the rule of law. I can't support Mayor VanGordon enough, a man of common sense in a world sadly devoid of it. And I agree with you, Steve. Again, I will say that my concern is always about excessive force and always about situations. The Stacey Kenny situation was absolutely disgusting. The way what went down with Stacey Kenny. Now I've talked to Barbara Kenny about coming on the podcast, and the only reason I haven't done it yet is because I need to make sure that I'm fully prepared, because that is a very difficult story and I plan to tell it, but it's just, I want to do it justice. I want to do it right, And so there's situations that have happened that I just and policing is tough, and I just don't think that there's an easy answer. Like, there's people that want to say, if you just police with a heavy, just people need to follow the law of what did Steve's, you said the rule of law. And I agree with that. But in that Black Lives Matter protest, my problem is nobody wants special treatment, or at least I don't want special treatment for anybody. What I want is equal rights, which means that you police the same for everyone.
Right.
And so when someone's punching someone, that person needs to be held accountable. Do you know what I'm saying? And so if they're doing it, punching these Black Lives Matter protesters, then those people need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And I think they have been to an extent, but they weren't on that moment. They were not.
Right. And like I said, I can't
sure, you can't speak on it,
but I know that there's a concern that says, okay, all these, you've got a lot of stuff in the news, what actually happens to it. And you brought up the Kennys, and that case is closed, and it has a really good example of how I think we're approaching policing. Right. First of all, the Kennys have been there was a lot of recommendations for the PD that came out of that lawsuit, and the Kennys have been, as a family, I think about them almost every single day.
Yeah, me too.
I've had the opportunity to talk to the Kennys several times, and especially, I've been really inspired by their willingness to stick with this as a topic, because it wasn't just, hey, here's the recommendations now, and we're never going to talk again. It is not uncommon for as we approach certain things from that are in that Kenny settlement, for Barbara Kenny and I to talk, and just to be like, do we have it yet? Like, what is your ultimate vision of this? And I think that is a sense of how you go from getting recommendations saying that you should go do X, to truly making it part of the DNA of your organization. 15 years from now, we will still be talking about the Stacey Kenny incident.
Right.
20 years from now, we still will be. But look at how the conversation around how the city approached use of force, has changed, and arguably for the better. The first time we produced that use of force report, it was essentially a pie chart, right?
Right.
The second time, everybody tabulated, had to go tabulate everything by hand. And, it was better. The next time, then we invested in what was called the IA Pro software. We brought another FTE around data science, specifically around this software, to make sure that we were getting the kind of the accountability that we wanted out of it, and make sure we were getting every mile that we could out of it. So it was, the conversation really started, as part of the settlement. And then we really broke it down and said, okay, how do we put it in front of council every single year like we're supposed to? Ultimately, I want to have it come up at the same date every single year, so that we're clear and open and transparent about it. And if you follow those conversations, they are not easy. they're in depth, and both the police and the council respond with nuance and, compassion, and really diving into, well, what does this mean, and how do we take what happened the last year and turn it into reform to kind of go forward. The other commitment that I've made is that we've brought the PD back for a long, in-depth report to keep it in front of us and the public, at least once a quarter since I've been mayor.
Yeah. I think with public safety, though, my thoughts go to what we want. I'm not anti. I'm not defund the police. I think that I'm not on that train. I do think that we need to, like I said, almost increase services and rethink and modernize how we're thinking about things. But we also need accountability across the board. People say that they want personal accountability for the homelessness and for the poor and for drug addicts. We need that for the police. We need personal accountability. And so sometimes when Chief Shearer was on, and I'm not saying we don't, when Chief Shearer was on, he did say something that I took to heart. And this is what's so cool about what I get to do, because I get to meet people and learn from them. And there's two examples: school board and police chief. Zach Bassett, who I grew up with, was on the school board. And he said, sometimes when you fire the superintendent, it's actually a net not gain, because it takes 18 months sometimes to get back to where you already were. And then you don't actually make any progress, and it's time for another reelection. So nobody wants to, ruffle any feathers. You don't get anything done. So when we were talking, that's a different issue, but this is where my brain went with it. With Police Chief Shearer, I said, don't you think that we should have a citizen review board, police review board? And he said, yeah, but not if they have ultimate control. They can give recommendations. And I'm like, well, isn't the problem when the police are policing themselves? That's proven to not be working. We need an outside arbitrator or arbiter. I don't know the difference, but that, we need both a little bit. And maybe there's a little bit of give and take, but he said there is a chance to fire, to oust the police chief, and it goes through the mayor and the city manager. Is that correct? So it's like, if you're not liking where you go, and I like what he said, and I know why he said it, because he cannot be looking over his shoulder all the time. He has to just focus on his job.
Right. And
so, and he said also that is the job of the police chief. And if they appointed me, and you don't think that they find it, basically he kind of passed it off. It's like, well, if there's issues and you want to take them up with them, because they are the ones that appoint me. And so if you don't like the way that it's going, that's where you would do it. And it's an interesting thing. So anybody listening, I recommend going back and listening to those.
It's a great podcast.
Oh, it's one of my best.
We've been extraordinarily lucky to have gotten Chief Shearer. And when you kind of brought up this term, this term about accountability, like a lot of my background's really in business, right? So when I talk about accountability, I always take two terms that people have. Like, if you say this to people, like, hey, I'm going to hold you accountable, right? That's, I'm going to get you in trouble, right? And if we stand, the way I approach sort of being mayor is like, we've got to talk about accountability of self, right? I'm accountable, right? Yeah. Like, sure, like situationally, it may not be somebody's fault. Maybe you don't have the right tools, but every day people have got to walk through the door in business, policing, whatever in their life, and just simply say, I'm accountable. Like, I'm accountable for my behavior. I'm accountable for my approach. And I think that's a sort of subtle difference. And then I think that when that question about sort of transparency comes up, one of the places we've got to talk about what's happening more, right? Some of the things that we don't share are a product of that there's either employment law, right? In regards to it, there's state law in regards to it, or, our outgoing litigation. And I always emphasize to people, hey, we're not going to share that. But as we sort of talk about how do we get to that next level, and this was part of the conversation around, complaints and reviews, right? We don't need to choose, like, here's the specific solution. Hey, Eugene's got a citizens review board. If we had Eugene's citizens review board, it would be effective for us. We need to actually talk to these guys about where we want to go. We want to know, if people complain that they're being that they're, that whatever that issue is being looked at and actions being taken for it. Right. That could be a citizens review board. That could be something else. But I can tell you that whatever that process is, it needs to be a little bit more transparent. The PD needs to be like, we are at the point of, we just moved our complaints process into the new software, this IA Pro. Everything's got a control number. We know how long, complaints have, we'll know how long complaints have been in the queue, right? All the information's in the same place. And then after that, I hope we get to a point that we're sort of talking about and just saying like, hey, Patty, you're a taxpayer. We had 17 complaints last week, right? Half of them were, we took action on. 10% of them were unfounded or whatever the results were. And just, that's what transparency looks like. That's what the conversation about accountability looks like.
And I just, last thing, and we'll move on from policing, but there's people in the Springfield government that Joe Pictionary, for an example, that he has this attitude, at least in my opinion, that is just like, well, he's a cop, he's a moral man. I just think that that's not fair because they're people. They are, sure, they're moral, but what's to say that just because you're a cop, this is my whole issue. When someone says like a cop tells me, and I'm a barber, and so I've met military, police,
absolutely,
which is beautiful, which I'm super grateful for because it's made me evolve as an adult. Because I was a little anarchist kid from South Eugene, and I've had to grow up, because I transferred schools, and then I was like, oh my God, But when someone says, I pulled, I'm in a situation and my life is threatened as a police officer. I'm in a situation, my life is threatened. I have to make sure that I go home that night. And it's like, I asked this question, do you think that your life is more valuable than that suspect? And they're like, well, it's me, of course. No, the answer is no, it's not. It's not. I don't agree that person gets to decide just because you're a cop that your life is more valuable than the homeless man or than the black man or than whatever it is. It's just not fair. And when you have people like Joe Pictionary, that I see it on Facebook constantly, and maybe I should talk to him, but like I see it constantly where there's this attitude that they're like, well, they're cops, they're good people. And it's like, that needs to be broken down because that it's just not that simple.
Right,
it's way more nuanced.
Because they're cops doesn't make them bad people either.
If we don't have accountability, then there's no way to police the police. And that's all. That's basically what my take is. And I'm with you. You had laid out ways that people like Barbara Kenny put our feet to the fire as a city managers or city representatives. And it's a good thing because it's pushing. It's like, we will not stop until we get to a point where people are happy. And that I want to say something that I hope this is okay, because it's a little taboo. But behind the scenes, when we were prepping this episode, you had mentioned there's issues. I always give my questions, always. Right. And then I might add some. But you said something I thought was so incredible, because you said, I want to be responsible to my city. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I said, and I believe you. And so does Steve. So I have faith that we're going in a good direction. And so I'm really grateful.
And let me plug a couple more things. And I know we got a long list of stuff to get through, right? But like, it is going to be a long walk.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
and it takes all of us.
Yeah. And right. And I would encourage you to talk to Counselor Pictionary.
I want to,
because it's a more complicated,
and David Lovall.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think people like, and I talk to Joe all the time about this is, he was a cop for 30 years, right? Yeah. He assumes everybody knows all of this. Every time he talks about why policing works this way, and this is one of the things I think Chief Scheer does a really nice job of like, I'm not a police officer. I'm an industrial engineer.
Sure.
And going, oh,
I'm a barber.
Yeah. Put your teaching hat on it about it. But also I think to make sure that the community's feels like it's going, forward, we also have to, it is okay for us to come back and highlight all the good stuff folks are doing as well. Every once in a while, we'll have folks down at the city council just to say, hey, look, this event happened, right? We responded, hey, we got it right. Because when we sort of, talk to police, highlight police, we also as a community have to say, okay, this one, we got it right on. That doesn't mean we won't be perfect every single time.
Sure.
Right? Like, but being able to recognize that people are listening, people are reacting, and people are engaged in the conversation. The one thing I've been really impressed with the line staff at City Hall in the PD about is I've never had a conversation about this where people have been like pushed back and said, okay, we're not listening. We agree. We got to move forward. Policing is a calling. Like this, sometimes jobs you fall into, sometimes jobs, that you make a plan for. And sometimes you have these moments where you're, struck your Paul on the road to Damascus and you're hit by a lightning. Policing's a call.
Like how God told Ted Cruz he was going to be president.
Well, maybe not that far, but I know.
But, no, I want to say this real quick about Joe Pictionary, just as an example too.
Sure.
I make my comments and we're all entitled to our views. I will say that on Facebook, people need to understand that that's where people want to be smartasses. And that being said, I'm one of them. So my point is that just because I disagree with you and it's irritating, I would be an absolute hypocrite if I didn't allow him to have that room to be a little bit of a smartass or whatever. That being said, I learn stuff. It's like the Thurston Neighborhood Watch Facebook page, which is a train wreck. But that being said, like I do value the differences of opinion because that's why I love Springfield. And I've learned so much about, there's a lot of different views in this town. And there's a lot of people that come together and then they just kind of, like Steve had said, the rule of law, there's things that are just different, that I agree. And so
the biggest advocate for a drug court in Springfield has been Joe Pictionary.
Sure. And I think that I'm going to reach out to him, but
you should. I'll give him your
number.
I'm
going to do a forum. So it's not one-on-one so that we don't end up fist fighting each other. Not Joe. I'm not just specifically saying Joe, like David Lovell, Joe. I was very critical. And I think that it's fair during campaigns because I do my job, so
in campaigns are a crucible, right?
Yeah.
Like they should be critical.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to move on.
Okay.
I think we covered policing and public safety very well. So this is one of your favorite areas to talk about. I know is roads and transportation. So we had talked, I had Molly Markarian on to talk about the Main Street Safety Project, which proved to be extremely unpopular, especially with the Thurston residents. What is happening with the Main Street Safety Project now? Is it a dead project? And why do people hate roundabouts?
You set this up all for breaking news. Okay. So let's talk about where the project is right now. The 9 roundabouts, the continuous median, the thing that is that has been causing is dead. It is not like the council's official position written in a piece of paper with a vote with direction to our one employee is do not do any more work on this.
Wow. It was very unpopular. I was encouraging it because I like roundabouts. I went to Ireland.
Yeah. Originally when we went into the summer, we were going to go out and have listening sessions to kind of create an alternative sort of plan, for lack of a better word. And there's not been enough staffing. So realistically, we're not going to start those listening sessions until probably 23. The thing that there's no plan, there's no work being done on a plan. We're going to go out and talk to the business owners, in small groups and big groups and talk about, well, what do you guys want to see about the corridor before we put ink to paper? But that's not going to be for a long time.
I'm not sure if I know, but maybe we need cameras, in some of those areas more because I almost got hit by a car across the street on 51st where it's a 25 and a dude was driving by Riverview Elementary. Oh shit, that's real. But he was driving down the street going like 70. And there's issues with, there's people that there's a reason that the Main Street Safety Project was proposed.
Yes.
Because every single year, if not multiple times a year, there's people that get hit by cars and killed. And to do nothing, it's just like, I guess we're just accepting that that's just our fate. It's not your fault. This is just so unpopular. You have to, like you said, be responsible for the city or to the city. People didn't want it. And I'm not calling you out. I'm calling them out for
but I think
at what cost?
I think this is more nuanced than the roundabouts. Let's kind
There's a lot of businesses, but that being said, the proposal wasn't what people, they're like, it just sucks because I just feel like a lot of people are being so short-sighted with it. I was actually a supporter of it. I don't care I'll die on this hill.
No,
you know,
like
you know?
I understand, but I think you're talking in a language that is like, hey, I was for the roundabouts, right?
Well, no, just in
Yeah,
general, I liked a lot of the proposal, but there was
yeah.
a lot of stuff that was going to be terrible, and
There-
it wasn't the right answer. But we cannot do nothing.
So the question becomes, what can we do?
I don't know.
And
Yeah, this is your
and
job.
that's where the listening sessions are going to come.
Sure.
I feel like that people want to get to a plan, right? Then we avoid that every 5 years we're worried about LTD, ODOT, the city, about whether or not a plan can, some other planning, effort. I will tell you, I think the plan is somewhere around making sure and seeing all the investments that we've done today, like what were their impacts, right? Like getting clear on how we measure the safety, how we do it on a regular basis. When you talk to businesses along Main Street individually, people have needs. Somebody says, hey, look, I actually do need a crosswalk, right? I actually do need, a lane, a pull out, whatever. I think there's some of that work to be done. I think there's a win-win for everybody in here that allows us to go, okay, what do we really need to do to get through the next 5 years and give people the clarity and calmness? But that really is going to mean that the corridor's got to stay in its same footprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to have a conversation that says, we agree upon what the data, the safety data is, and what do we expect from a safety picture on the corridor. And then people are going to have, and there's probably half a dozen I can name off the top of my head. They have individual needs. Like let's not try to boil the whole ocean here. Let's try to talk to each area and go, okay, if you need a crosswalk, an updated light, we're going to get you all of those.
I want to say something. I want people
Sure.
to take notes when I say this, because I really think should be, I hope that this inspires people to take what I'm saying to heart and try to do this in their own lives. I really liked the project. Okay. And it didn't get pushed through because the people didn't want it. Like, this is where democracy wins, right? I'm happy about that. It wasn't me getting my way.
Right.
It wasn't me getting my way. It wasn't. I think you were supportive of it. You pushed to, at least you wanted to get the word out. My podcast wasn't getting quite the reach at the time.
Right.
And I also choose not to share it in the Thurston Neighborhood group page because I need to, I'm sharpening my chops more and more as we go. But those trolls, they can find me in time because they're going to be aggressive towards me. But that being said, some of them, and it only takes a couple, that it really can make. I'm a person that just lives. And I know you're a public figure. I'm sure that you've had some negative feedback too, just like everybody, where people want results immediately, and it's just it's so difficult. There's a reason things are slow. But I am okay with the fact that it didn't get pushed through. I'm not okay with the people dying. I want that to be clear. Nobody's is, that get hit by cars. I'm okay with the fact that for right now there's a pause because people did not want that proposal. They did not like it. And so I am not only about, when it comes to politics or governing, I'm not only about getting my way. I'm about democracy. I'm about the people, because I might not know I do not know everything about everything. Like you had mentioned before about our field of expertise. So I want that to be clear. I think we all need to do that. We all need to kind of sit back and be like, what do the people want?
And I believe people when they say they want to get to an answer that makes sense, that people can have a moment that they put their hand in the middle and say, yes, this is it. We got it.
Right.
That's where I want to end in this thing.
So now we received funding from the infrastructure bill. I don't really know a ton about this. This is really long, and we've got as much time as we want, but there's a few things I want to talk about still that we need to get to, but what are the plans to utilize funds that are coming from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed, Joe Biden pushed for? I want to make that clear. People, they call it on the news the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but Joe Biden has been a pretty good president in my opinion. He's gotten a lot of stuff done. So
the dollars go to ODOT first.
Okay.
And then they get sort of sub-granted to the big transportation agency down here that's called MPC, right? Where it is one of the most important committees. Definitely ask Randy Groves about this because he's the chair of MPC right now.
Okay.
And then it sort of gets sub-granted back down to the city. So the grant funds that we have will grow incrementally to fund, projects that we have sort of identified right now. so it's still in, I guess it's still in its early process. And then there will be some additional grants that we can go out for. I think there's a climate change grant that we can go apply for. I think there's some other grant programs out there that we can go apply for to bring dollars directly to the city. The thing that I think about with the infrastructure bill is people have to notice it. And I've said this a couple of times in the transportation meetings that I'm in, is if this is a generational investment in infrastructure, right? Like you've got to feel like we filled some potholes with it, fix the bridge.
Potholes, and we're going to also have to have charging stations, and those kind of things. And so you always reach out to me, but I really want you to reach out to me when there's news, when there's stuff, because I really want to deep dive into that. Just about, I'm down to talk about roads. People might tune out to it, but I think it's so important. And I think people actually are more interested than people realize.
One of the best news stories that we've had as a city has been that road bond. We're going to talk about Mohawk. It looks smooth and gorgeous. And I've talked to people that said, oh, thank goodness you found the time to do it.
What did you think of Pete Buttigieg?
I liked him.
Yeah, because you got to meet him. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I thought he was I thought the event was sharp. I thought he was engaged. And it just takes, we've got a lot of infrastructure investment.
Yeah.
And the part I want to be clear with folks is with infrastructure dollars, everybody can kind of come to the table and look for those dollars. We can't get too cute here, right? We've got to make sure that, average everyday Oregonians see a difference in the infrastructure they access every single day.
Yeah.
To get to home, to get to work, whether or not it's bus, bike, whatever, car, whatever. But we definitely have to move the dial with it.
Is it just weird side note, but he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably about the size of Eugene, correct?
Ooh,
200,000.
Don't.
But it's small. It's not huge. It's not huge.
Correct.
And then, so you're the mayor of a small town. Well, I mean, it's not tiny. It's 60,000 people.
Number 9 in the state of Oregon.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So
and metropolitan area.
Can you imagine running for president after being? I mean, wow! He's got some brass. I'll tell you that. I'm a fan actually of Pete Buttigieg a lot. And I actually really like the future of the Democrats. With people are going to hate me for this, but I'm interested in seeing what Gavin Newsom can do too. So we'll talk about that later. But Pete Buttigieg is somebody that I'm like, that dude's rad, because he's got a lot of nuance and a lot of different corners with military service and with his homosexual marriage and whatnot that is kind of modernized.
When we were at LTD, it was interesting because it was always Mayor Pete, right?
He's rad.
And I guess one of the things is once you're a mayor, right, that's everybody's former favorite job. But
you can share that with Rudy Giuliani. No, I'm just joking. Anyway, LED lights are coming. This is big. This is, I think, really exciting. So LED lights are going in all around town. Does this mean that the Simpsons will no longer be blue or to be yellow?
There will be plenty of yellow that is still out there.
Okay, good.
We're going to see more. The city agreed and used some of its ARPA funds to invest in LED lights, partially because when we got those ARPA funds, we looked for places that were going to move the community forward, that we're going to have an actual return on investment. One of the things we've wanted to do for years is reduce our power bill, right?
Yeah.
And be a little bit more environmentally friendly.
Sure.
And improve safety and lighting and public safety on, and that's how we got to the LED
lights. This is somewhere where me and Joe Pictionary agree. I've seen him talking about how he's in favor of these, and I have Alan Zundell. Shout out to Alan Zundell, that he talks about being a democratic socialist libertarian, right? And I want small government to be efficient, and so when you can save money, yes, it's amazing.
There's nothing but a plus from LED lights. And I know that there's going to be a group that worries about light pollution. I wish I had more details for you, but I can tell you the ops people are thinking about it too, and have a plan around it. But we want to see, when it's dark in the city, right? We want good lighting on the road.
Yeah. Also goes to public safety.
Yep.
So okay, so this is from Chris Wigg. He wanted me to ask, are you interested in having Springfield apply to become a tree city? And if you are, can you tell us a little bit about what the Tree City USA program is? He said he knows that Sean likes to talk about trees.
The tree program is going to be, it's pretty cool. When we started in 2021, we had planted about 40 trees the last year. And I think when I was out with Friends of Trees in April, they were planting 40 trees in that one city. And the city ops folks are excited about the potential program, have put dollars, have been out planting trees. And like, that's why one of the reasons that Mohawk looks absolutely gorgeous
and
right now.
Pioneer Parkway has always been.
Yeah. If I had my way, right, I would plant trees on I-5 and cover up and like when you get north of the town, feels like it becomes cement. And like you see ODOT having to deal with it the whole time. I'll tell you the city found $75,000 in a federal block grant dollars to go through and like look at places that don't have trees, right, that have heat islands, because we've had hotter weather, and to grind down stumps and look for places that we can get trees into the tree canopy in the broader end of the city. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to do something special for about a lot of our neighborhoods, and hopefully, that's one of our contributions, right? Like, is that trees add value to stormwater, and they add value to your neighborhoods, and they definitely add value to air quality and in the temperature.
Right. You had talked to me before about wanting to do a new library.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we at with that? Is that still an option? I mean, not even an option. Is it something that has there been news yet, or?
Yeah. So the new library originally had been planned to go across the street. So if you walk across City Hall, there's kind of a big parking lot. We're just not there yet, right? Like the building down, what's called the Carter Building right now has got to be taken down. And we've got a lot of work that's being done in North Gateway. We've got a lot of work that's being done in Glenwood. And the library is doing a really nice job. And then I'm going to give another kind of a shout out to a program I'm really excited about, of going out and saying, okay, if you don't use the library, why? And then how can we get you down here?
Sure.
And if the Cultural and Arts Center of Springfield is really that plaza, the library does a lot to program that plaza and make sure that we see a lot of different folks down there sort of singing, dancing, reading. Partnership that we had with the school district. I've been a real big fan of this program. The school district just came through with long-term funding. It's called FESL, right? In government, we love acronyms.
I know.
Right?
I know.
But essentially what it does is saying, hey, if you're in the school district and you're a kid and you're outside of the city limits, we're going to make sure you have a library card.
And there's digital stuff that people don't understand, that you can go to the library, you can check out books online and read, so that's
cool. And right. Like, I used to hear stories about kids from Springfield School District coming to City Hall and be like, oh, you're in the city, you can check this stuff out. Out of the city, we're not going to And anytime we work together as government agencies to make sure we put books in kids' hands when they're at that age is a good thing.
I used to go to the library when I was in my 20s. This is going to show my age, but to check out VHS movies, because I was so poor that I didn't have cable or a DVD player. So I was like, seriously, I mean, I was coming up, and
my goddaughter didn't know what rewind was, right? Like,
it doesn't make sense to say,
it's just counterintuitive, right? Because you've never experienced.
Remember, like the VHS rewind, whatever those things are called, that would rewinders, and they would be like shaped like cars,
the
and
fast
stuff.
Ones.
They'd be shaped like cars, and it's like, ooh, that's so cool. So, one thing that I think it was Vince Casey that asked this. I could be wrong, but do you know who is doing all the Simpsons murals?
There's a couple that are official, right? The official one's the one on the Emerald Arts Center. The ones that are in the person, like in the alleyways, the business is working with somebody. I think I know somebody who knows the name, right? But they're all private businesses that are sort of doing it. And that's been one of the cool things about the art program is, like, we've invested in the big pieces, and that's really spun off these sort of secondary conversations. And it's not just Simpsons murals. There's all sorts of art around this. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's awesome. And I think it could potentially be decent for at least drive-through tourism, where people, because I know that when I travel, you look on Google and you look at attractions, and people will check in at places, and that leads to, I went and saw in Ireland, Muhammad Ali has a statue, because they honored him because he's like 1/740th percent Irish.
Oh, okay.
It's more than that. It's more than that.
But there's got to be a tie.
And Joe Biden, Ballina is the city. I think his family was from Ireland, or part of his family.
I think I've heard.
So, I mean, there's a mural. I mean, it's just, we like to do Easter egg hunts when we go travel, which, by the way, November 8th, election day, I'm going to Washington, D.C. And so I'm going to be going to the Capitol. I'm going to be doing a bunch of fun stuff. So we got one more question, and then there's a topic that is way too long for us to cover in 5 minutes, but I'm going to ask about it anyway. I got a question from a listener, a good friend of mine, Simon Ratty. And this is tough, and I don't know if there's really a good answer quickly without nuance, but he said, I'd like to know if anything is being done to reduce rents and create more single occupancy residencies for under $800 a month. That's asking a lot, but still, I mean, it's where the cost of rent in Eugene and Springfield has soared. And now with Oregon passing a 4.9% cap, it was an increase in the cap on how much they can raise rents. It's even scarier that it's just difficult, So what is being done? At least let's focus on the is there stuff being done by single occupancy residencies?
I don't know if there's anything on single occupancy residencies. There's a group in town, and I cannot think of the name, that is sort of doing some of that work. But like in Springfield, what we've done is we consistently just take the sideboards off of anything that has to do with housing, so that if you can build something small, you can build something big, it's easier to figure out, if I own a piece of property, how am I going to develop it? And, how can I actually build housing on it? So I'm always interested in people to go, okay, there's another business model. Is it kind of applicable under the code? We've got a lot of, we've had the best 2 housing years that we've ever had the last 2 years. Part of that is driven by Marcola Meadows.
I was going to just bring that up. Yeah.
Yep. But, and then, we've got other conversations around affordable housing that are always going on, and a lot more, I guess, projects around housing that are in that medium term to sort of fill in that need. The best thing this is a half state conversation, half city conversation. We are a pro housing city. We want to make it easy for people to build and develop and try to get more housing out there, so that I've talked to my nephew who just got a good job out of college, and at 22, and I'm going, and I see he told me what his rent bill was, and I just was like,
it's
wow,
insane.
It is insane.
So you mentioned Marcola Meadows. Mm-hmm. So okay, I want you to tell me briefly, if possible, what it is, what people that are unaware of the program, or what, this new building construction. Is it higher end housing?
It's
medium to high.
Medium to high. If you drive out there, there's some high end. It's a big subdivision. It's it's probably going to be 750 new homes that are going to be out there. It's the last big subdivision that we have.
Okay.
And it's really kicked off. So they're building the housing in right now. In the next couple of years, they're going to add a pretty big apartment complex. I think across the street, somebody's going to add another big apartment complex. In long term, I believe there's a school and a church that's going to go out there, and maybe some light commercial, to really sort of fill it in. But the reality is, if we had 1,000 more homes tomorrow in Springfield, if we could just flip a switch, we would have we'd have them sold by next week.
Sure. And I'm a believer in, if you build all levels of income homes, it's good. Like pro housing, like you said, 100%. It's crucial that we get affordable housing, though. We have to do things that they cater to that. I'm okay with the argument that people make, typically conservatives, will make that if you have middle and high income housing developments, trickle down bullshit that they always say. They say what it does is it opens up lower income housing because people that are going to move up, and that is, there's truth to that.
Yeah, that is
now
true.
That being said, one thing that I'm not okay with is developers that want to build those houses and then use that argument to get the tax cut to call it low income housing development, because that's not fact. You know what I'm
So I just want to, I was just over at the Home Builders Association, and I don't hear that.
There's been some stuff with not maybe in Springfield,
right,
but there's been some stuff. I've been hearing some talk behind the scenes about the developer of the Fifth Street Public Market. I can't remember his name, but that he was applying for, he wanted to get low income housing status so that he could build this high income housing. And he's like, well, it opens up low income housing. And it's like, nope, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I think if this is the development I'm thinking about, I think it's a little bit more complicated.
I'm sure it is more complicated than that, but I just think that that's troubling when people want to make an argument because trickle down economics, I saw a meme and it sums it up perfectly, which is all whatever, but it's true. And it's a joke, but still, a mom and a daughter, and the daughter says, "Mom, how does trickle down economics work?" And the mom says, "Well, first the 1% gets all the money," and then the daughter goes, "And then what?" And she goes, "Oh, that's it."
So trickle down economics is probably the wrong term to use around.
Sure, that's fair. That's fair.
Around housing, but I'll tell you these two things, and I know we're running up on the timepiece.
Right.
The first one is, it is true that people move up and down the housing spectrum. The other piece is, we've got to be aspirational as a city. And I know that there's subsidized housing and a need for it, but we also want to create an avenue where people don't rely on a subsidy to be able to make rent every single month and feel like that, they can grow in their jobs and their careers and, be financially better off at the end of their career than they were at the beginning of their career. The other thing that why you've got to get the mix right. And from looking at from the city's finances, like, market rate housing pays for a lot of teachers and a lot of firefighters and a lot of police officers too. Right.
That's true.
So
that's true.
So we got to find that
That's
balance to move, to allow everybody to be in the community and everybody to sort of move up so that, where we can, people get the help that they need, but ultimately I want them to own homes on their own.
And explain that. I know why, but like in a layman's terms, the reason that it pays market, what did you say?
So market rate and above market, like premium housing, pays for a lot of
through property taxes,
because they're valued at
like the
property.
Police levy that we talked about today, and like supporting teachers and the library and all that.
Right. Like, so the amount, like, just look at, just go online to Zillow and look at the tax bills that and they're significantly higher. Well, that's the money that funds local services too, right? So finding that balance matters a lot, because I also want to pay, teachers, firefighters, and librarians, and have great services too.
So now, last question, and this is the last question, and there's no possible way that we can talk about this in 5 minutes.
Okay, good.
I do want to have you back on, and we will have an episode devoted entirely to this question. Okay. And
I feel like I'm being set up here. Yeah. But go ahead.
Is Glenwood Springfield?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a lot of talk about what's happening with Glenwood, about riverfront properties potentially. And I know that some of this stuff, again, because of proposals and things, we may not be able to talk about, but I really want to do an episode just about Glenwood. So today we talked ad nauseum. I know that I'm hungry, so my stomach's growling. And I know that there's two that have stuck with us the whole time. And I appreciate you guys so much, that are probably thrown up because of how much, we're spinning all over the place. No, but we've talked ad nauseum, but we've covered Springfield today. Maybe after the new year, when I get past this election, or we all get past this election, speaking of throwing up in your mouth, when we will have an episode about Glenwood, because there's just so much,
Yeah, I may not be.
There's no question.
I to bring right for
sure.
That. The man knows about Glenwood.
Okay.
Like, drive right.
Yeah. It's in Glenwood.
Why it's still got something to do. I'm sure that the bottom of the post Washington DC when it over to Springfield for 20 years, Springfield has long the post office. If you address your Glenwood,
because I think if I connect anyway, some stupid reason. Hey, Sean VanGordon, thank you so much. This has been an absolute treat. So I think we covered a lot today. Back on, Eve Mo, but always welcome on the podcast. And if you'd like to come out, just reach out to me. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.